The bell above the store entrance jingled as Daniel Carter stepped into Hillcrest Outfitters, a high-end sporting goods store nestled in the heart of downtown. He adjusted his worn leather jacket, brushing off the cold autumn air from his broad shoulders. The store smelled of polished wood and new merchandise, the air crisp with the scent of freshly unpacked inventory. He had barely made it past the entrance when he felt it, the subtle shift in the atmosphere. Conversations paused. Eyes lingered. The tension in the room was as thick as the chilled wind outside. At the counter, a man in his mid-50s with slicked-back silver hair and a name tag reading Gary Winston store manager narrowed his eyes at Daniel. Gary's lips twisted in a sneer as he stepped from behind the counter, his hands resting on his hips in a stance of authority. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone laced with condescension. Daniel nodded, ignoring the hostility. "I'm just looking for a new pair of hiking boots." Gary folded his arms. "We don't have what you're looking for." Daniel glanced around. The shelves were stocked with every brand imaginable, from entry-level hikers to professional-grade boots. "Looks like you have plenty." Gary's lips curled. "Maybe I wasn't clear. We don't have anything for you." Daniel sighed, suppressing the growing irritation bubbling within him. "Man, I just want to buy a pair of boots. And I just want my store to maintain a certain image." Gary stepped closer, his voice lowering. "We don't need people like you in here making customers uncomfortable." Daniel clenched his jaw. He had faced prejudice before. He knew this game all too well. "People like me?" Gary smirked. "Come on, you know exactly what I mean. Guys like you don't hike. Probably looking for something to steal." "Huh? You need to go." A younger employee, a girl with dark braids and a name tag reading Tasha, shifted uneasily behind the counter. Her eyes darted between Gary and Daniel. Her lips pressed tight as if she wanted to say something but knew better. Daniel inhaled deeply, his hands flexing at his sides. He had spent years learning to control his anger, to pick his battles wisely. Today was no different. "You know what? You keep your boots. I'll take my money somewhere else." Gary chuckled smugly. "That's the best decision you've made all day. Now get out." Daniel turned, pushing open the door. As he stepped outside, a sharp gust of wind hit him, but it was nothing compared to the sting of humiliation burning in his chest. He knew the truth. Some battles weren't won in the moment. Sometimes karma had a way of delivering justice when the time was right. The next morning, Gary Winston strolled into his store with a smug sense of satisfaction. He had always run a tight ship. He prided himself on keeping a certain standard among his clientele. And as far as he was concerned, he had done the right thing by removing an undesirable element. He was halfway to his office when a voice called out, "Gary, you're going to want to see this." One of the employees pointed at the store's mounted television, which played the morning news. Gary turned toward the screen, his expression one of mild disinterest, until he saw the face staring back at him. Daniel Carter. The news anchor spoke with controlled excitement. "Meet retired Army Colonel Daniel Carter, a decorated veteran and humanitarian who has spent the last decade advocating for homeless veterans across the country. He is set to receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom this weekend for his outstanding service." Gary felt the blood drain from his face. The screen switched to footage of Daniel standing behind a podium at a recent event, his posture straight, his deep voice commanding as he addressed a crowd. "We fought for this country, and yet too many of my brothers and sisters come home to a society that turns its back on them. We must do better. We will do better." The camera panned to a roaring crowd, applause filling the room. Gary swallowed hard. He felt the weight of every customer in the store turning toward him, their gazes like daggers. Whispers started. Some customers shook their heads in disgust. Others murmured under their breath, eyeing him with new understanding. Tasha, the young employee from yesterday, smirked knowingly. Guess he wasn't what you thought. Huh. Gary? Gary's hands tightened into fists. This couldn't be happening. He had kicked out a national hero. A man who probably had more influence in his pinky finger than Gary had in his entire life. His pulse pounded. He had to fix this. Fast. By noon, Gary was glued to his office computer, frantically typing out a public apology on the store's social media page. He tried to make it sound heartfelt, but the words felt forced even to him. We sincerely regret any misunderstanding that may have occurred and deeply respect our veterans. Pathetic, but it was damage control. A knock at the door made him jump. He looked up, his stomach twisting as he saw a figure standing in the doorway. Daniel Carter. Gary's mouth went dry. He shot to his feet. Listen, man. Daniel raised a hand, silencing him. He stepped inside, his presence commanding without even trying. Save it. I'm not here for an apology. Gary gulped. Then why are you here? Daniel pulled something from his pocket and slid it across the desk. It was a folded document. Gary frowned and opened it. As his eyes skimmed the paper, his breath caught in his throat. It was a business acquisition letter. Daniel smiled, but it wasn't friendly. See, I wasn't looking for hiking boots yesterday. I was scouting. Hillcrest Outfitters has been on the market for a while, and after what happened here, I figured, why not buy it? Gary's heart pounded. You bought my store? Daniel nodded. Well, technically, I close on it next week. But yeah. Gary felt the room tilt. His hands trembled. You can't do this. Daniel leaned in, his voice calm. You see, Gary, I spent my life fighting for something bigger than myself. And people like you, you're not the biggest obstacle I've faced. You're just another lesson in why we need change. Gary opened his mouth to protest, but Daniel straightened and turned toward the door. Oh, and Gary? You're fired. With that, Daniel walked out, leaving Gary frozen in place. The store that had once been his kingdom, now it belonged to the very man he had thrown out. And justice had never tasted sweeter. Daniel Carter sat at his desk, staring at the now silent phone. The anonymous call had confirmed what he already suspected. Gary Winston wasn't done. The man had lost everything, and desperate men made dangerous choices. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his mind racing through possibilities. He had faced threats before, both on the battlefield and in business, but something about this felt different. It was personal, and personal vendettas could turn ugly. His instincts told him to prepare. Across town, Gary Winston slammed his empty whiskey glass onto the table, his nerves frayed. Travis Rourke, his old friend with a talent for causing trouble, sat across from him, exhaling a cloud of cigarette smoke. You sure you want to do this? Travis asked, tapping the ash off his cigarette. Once we start, there's no going back. Gary's jaw tightened. That man humiliated me, took everything I worked for. If I let this slide, I'll be nothing. Travis smirked. Fine. We'll make sure Carter regrets ever stepping foot in that store. Gary nodded, his heart pounding. Tonight it would all come to a head. The night air was thick and heavy as Daniel locked up the store, his eyes scanning the quiet street. He had taken extra precautions. Security cameras were installed, alarms were set, and his military instincts kept him alert. As he approached his car, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. A shadow moved near the alley. Then, a sharp metallic sound. The click of a gun being cocked. Don't move, a voice growled. Daniel slowly turned, his hands raised slightly. Gary stood there, his face twisted with rage, a pistol shaking in his grip. Travis loomed behind him, a menacing grin on his face. You think you can take my store, my life, and just walk away? Gary spat. Daniel stayed calm, his eyes locked onto Gary's. You're making a mistake. No, Gary snapped. You made the mistake when you walked into my store. You don't belong in my world. Daniel's expression hardened. And what is your world, Gary? One where people like me stay beneath people like you? That world is gone. You lost because you were wrong. And now you're about to make it worse. Travis chuckled. Enough talk. Let's teach him a lesson. Just as Travis stepped forward, a loud voice boomed from the street. Freeze! Police! Red and blue lights flooded the alley as sirens screamed through the night. Officers poured in, weapons drawn. Gary's face turned ghostly pale as he realized what was happening. Daniel remained still, a knowing smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. Did you really think I wouldn't see this coming? I've been trained to anticipate threats before they happen. You were sloppy, Gary. Gary's grip on the gun wavered as officers rushed him. Within seconds, both he and Travis were on the ground, handcuffed and subdued. Tasha emerged from the shadows, her phone still recording. Smile for the camera, Gary. You're about to be famous for all the wrong reasons. Gary's eyes burned with fury, but it was over. His downfall was complete. The next morning, Daniel stood at the front of Carter's Outdoor and Tactical, shaking hands with community members who had come to support him. The air buzzed with positivity, the store thriving under its new leadership. As Daniel looked around, he saw what true victory looked like. Not revenge, not violence, but success in the face of adversity. A news reporter approached him. Mr. Carter, do you have anything to say about last night's events? Daniel smiled, his eyes glinting with quiet strength. Actions have consequences. Some people never learn that until it's too late. But for me, I'll keep moving forward. Always. The cameras flashed. The world would remember what happened here. And as for Gary Winston, his name would become nothing more than a cautionary tale. Want to know what happens next? Make sure to like, subscribe, and follow for part 4. Stay tuned.